Welcome to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast, where we help women struggling with recurrent pregnancy loss by sharing stories of hope and interviews with experts in the field of fertility and miscarriage. If you want to download our free lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, you will go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to download your free checklist. If you want to connect with others going through recurrent miscarriage, please check out our show notes for a link to our Facebook group. Now I'm going to hand it over to your host, Laura Bowder, for today's episode.
Welcome back to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast. Today I have Brandy Cummings with me, and Brandy is a functional nutritionist. So she supports women and their wellness all the way through from preconception to postpartum. And she is going to be sharing her expertise with us today, as well as a little bit about her personal journey. So Brandy, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited.
So I would love to start off with having you tell us a little bit about yourself, what your journey to motherhood was like, and how that has all led to where you are at today with your functional nutrition practice.
Sure, I'd love to. So I started my nutrition practice several years ago, and long before I was a mom. And then my husband and I decided we wanted to start our family, and it wasn't happening so fast as people, when you're a teenager, people tell you just look at each other and you'll get pregnant.
Yes.
So it wasn't happening as fast as we wanted. And then I did get pregnant. And then one day I started to have some spotting, and I didn't know what was happening or what was going on. And so I went to urgent care because I was feeling pretty icky. I was feeling pretty crampy and not great. And so I went to the urgent care, and while the nurse was taking my vitals, the doctor, I can still hear the sound of her hand hitting the door. She burst in, and she was like, wait, before you get any further. And then she looks at me and goes, "There's absolutely nothing we can do for you. You have to leave." So I'm just staring at her, and she's just staring at me, and it felt like forever. And so eventually no one was talking. The nurse was sitting in the chair okay. And no one was talking. So I just stood up and so awkwardly just walked out. And then I sat in my car, and I was just like,
what do we do, right?
What just happened? And so there was absolutely zero conversation about what I was experiencing, the level of pain, what the spotting looked like, the color, the amount. There was no questions. There was no sense of really humanity, at the very least, she could have sat down and looked me in the eye and been like, "I don't know if you're miscarrying right now, but if you are, this is what you can expect. This is what to do over the next several days. This is what to not do. If this happens, you should go to the ER. I mean, all of that could have happened, and nothing. I got absolutely nothing. So I went home, and I had to just turn to Google because I had no idea what was going on. And I came to the realization that I was miscarrying. And so without, any support really, my husband did the best that he could. He was grieving too, and
Sure.
So really without any support, I just went through that process. And I remember thinking, I remember being at the store and just thinking what a reminder that you never know what somebody's going through. Because here I am standing in this grocery store, in the process of losing my pregnancy, and everyone else thinks I'm fine. And so I got through that process, and fast forward a little until I got pregnant again. And this time I carried my pregnancy to term, but while I was pregnant, I actually had to switch care halfway through. I was at my midwife appointment one day, and I wanted to have a dialogue about maybe like not using a Doppler or using a Doppler. I just wanted to talk about it. I wanted to have a conversation about the glucola drink, and just kind of talk about what my options were. And she looks at me and says, if you don't want those things, then why are you here? So again, awkward staring back and forth, right? Like, okay. And, prior to when I got to this point, I remember thinking like, because when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant again. So I called, to make an appointment, and they're like, yeah, like come back at week 11, which I just thought was insane. I'm like, no, like, what do you mean there's like no support until week 11? What are you talking about? That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, then I had that experience with my midwife. So I had to switch care. I was like, if I can't even have a dialogue, like we have problems. And so I switched care, and then fast forward to, when I gave birth, I felt like there were, again, I don't know what it was about my luck. I mean, right after I gave birth, which was a 40-hour labor, the nurse looked at me and said, and I had been awake for 60 hours by this point. And the nurse looked at me and said, oh, you have flat nipples. You're going to have a tough time breastfeeding. Ensue the awkward staring again. Like, what is happening? Why do people say stuff like this? I don't understand. And, and then fast forward a little till my postpartum journey, it was so tough, and I had such terrible postpartum anxiety, and it felt so alone, and it was so hard. And my postpartum visit was just like, yep, you can have sex, you can go back to work 12 weeks, like, okay, congratulations. And so, wow, after I got through that whole process,
just a complete lack of support, really, across the board.
Gosh. Yeah, that's when I was like, this is not okay. And as a functional nutritionist, there's so much I can do to be filling these gaps and making sure things are not falling through the cracks, and being a consistent support person, from beginning to end, even before the beginning. And so that's when I completely rebranded. I completely switched gears, and I've never been so clear about my my purpose and what I meant to do. And that is, in a long nutshell, that's how I got here.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like so many women can relate to your whole story, or certainly parts of it, and just being kind of left wondering, like, what am I supposed to do now? What am I supposed to look for? How am I supposed to handle this? Do you have any thoughts about like anything that, would have been helpful to you? I know you talked a little bit about like what the doctor could have done in that urgent care appointment. What would have been helpful along the way that could have prevented some of that feeling of just total lack of support?
So I think several things. I think one of my big missions in life is to really put preconception health on the map. I don't know why we don't have conversations about preconception health. And I talk a lot about how the health of a person, when they become pregnant, can really have a direct impact on the health of their grandchildren, through this transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. And so it's really important that we have healthy people getting pregnant, and there's no conversation, there's no support about that, unless there's an issue, unless you're having trouble, then we start having conversations about infertility and IVF and other options, but there's no conversation before that. And with the world that we live in, with how toxic it is and the quality of our food, and we have to have that conversation. It's just not so easy, and it's just not this, we don't live in this perfectly clean world, and we just get pregnant so easy, and we have these healthy babies all the time. It's just not the world we live in. So we need that support. And so, after I miscarried, I would have loved to have a preconception visit, and talk about all of the things and go through certain things that can contribute to miscarriage. And let's dive into those, kind of like what, I do now with my clients, but that would have been so helpful. And then that first 11 weeks, you're just fending for yourself. And there's so much neurodevelopment happening at that time, and there's just no conversation about that. So again, a like first trimester, any support there would have been lovely. And then through the pregnancy, I think the biggest thing that would have been helpful is just having providers that respected that this is my pregnancy and my body, and was willing to have a conversation with me. And I couldn't believe what she said to me. And you don't talk to people like that. And then postpartum, what would have been so helpful, forget about the baby shower. What I learned now is babies really don't need much at all. What the mom needs plenty.
Yes.
And so I wish that I would have done no gifts and just meals and a postpartum doula. And that would have came in so much handy. So
yeah, really,
I think the overarching theme is just a lot more support and a big shift in the standard of care.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I know that so many women are listening right now and thinking yes, all of the above. What was it like? So, you're experiencing this miscarriage and you have just been turned away by the medical professionals. I guess my question would just be, how did you process that? How did you move forward from that experience without that support from the medical professionals?
It's a really interesting, we put so much trust and power into our medical professionals.
Yeah.
And when they turn you away, basically, you don't have one in your corner, you don't have someone that has your back. It's a very weird feeling. It's just well, where do I go from here? If I don't have my doctor, where do I go? And I think how I processed it was just the best way that I could. And I joined a couple other miscarriage groups on Facebook because I felt really lonely. And, once you kind of go through that experience, all of a sudden it opens up you realize how much more common it is, and how all these people around you have experienced the same thing, but nobody is talking about it. And there's a lot of stigma around it. And so, reaching out for support from those groups was really helpful. I remember, it's a cultural thing. It's just a flaw in our system. And I remember when I went home that night, my husband was at work because he was working graveyard. So I was home alone. I called my dad. Of course he's upset. I called my mom. She lived out of state. I called my best friend, and I called my close cousin. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But I felt why isn't anybody coming over? I am I just felt so alone. I just felt why isn't somebody oh my gosh, I'll be right there. That's not your knee-jerk reaction when you hear that kind of news. We just kind of leave people to deal with that. And I think it's just a cultural thing because we don't talk about it.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
If you haven't experienced it, you don't realize how tough and how much grief there is and how big a loss it is. And so, you know, I just did the best I could, which really, in retrospect, I don't think was that great. It was really lonely and tough. And
Yeah.
I remember telling myself, I just want to fast forward to a day that I don't cry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can we just get to that day? Like, I know that day will come, but like, I just want to fast forward to that day, because it was just every day, just really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And that day does come, you're right. But like, I love the point that you just made about why isn't anyone coming over? Like, why don't we go and support each other in a way that we would if, like, I don't know, some other loss occurred in your life suddenly, or I don't know, just you call someone and you're upset about something. A lot of times their reaction would be, oh, like, what do you need? Do you want me to bring you something? Do you want me to come over? And with this, I think you're right. There is something cultural that the response is, I need to let them be alone now. And I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good thought. I don't know either.
But I think that's definitely something to think about, either if you are, you know, experiencing a loss like this. Maybe we just need to be a little more upfront and say, you know what, I really would love it if you would come over, or if you would bring a meal or something like that. And on the flip side, if you know somebody who is experiencing this, offer. I mean, they might say no, but I feel like if you're really close to them, they would definitely appreciate that gesture.
For sure. Yeah.
I know you also mentioned, you know, like going through a preconception visit, and you mentioned that you do something like that with the clients that you see. Is there anything that you could share with our audience about what they might want to think about preconception?
Sure. Yeah. So when we're thinking preconception, there's several things to kind of pillars of things to keep in mind. One, your nutrient status. Being pregnant is a very nutrient dependent process, and we want to make sure that we don't have insufficiencies or deficiencies, and making sure that, you know, we're doing everything that we can so that we have enough reserves to carry that pregnancy. Also, I don't think it's a bad idea to look into your hormones. I do the Dutch test with my clients. It's very comprehensive. And with that also, you know, complete thyroid panel. And the baby uses mom's thyroid hormones until like week 11. And so after that, then the baby's kicks in. But if you have like hypothyroid, whether, you know, you might not even know it. So many people have subclinical hypothyroid and don't even know it. And so if there's not enough of that hormone, you know, during that early time, it can raise the chance of miscarrying. And so looking into that ahead of time, knowing where you're at, knowing where those thyroid hormones are at. I also think that when I work with people, there's 5 functional lab tests that I do, and I do them for a reason, because I think they kind of address each kind of pillar of things to think about preconception. Mm-hmm. So I do urinary organic acids, which is going to tell me a lot about nutrient status, as well as a lot about just mitochondrial health and neurotransmitter. And it's just a nice snapshot of just kind of overall health. Then we have the Dutch, like I talked about, and then a GI map, which looks at your microbiome and what's going on in your gut, which, you know, it's becoming more and more well known how important gut health is, and the connection to pretty much everything. There's a gut connection too. And then we do a genetic analysis. So if I think it's nice to know if we have certain genetic mutations, you know, also known as SNPs. If we have certain SNPs like MTHFR or CBS or things like this, those can impact, you know, how we methylate, how we use folate. And so knowing that ahead of time, I think, is so helpful, because if we have a hard time methylating and, you know, using folate, well, we need to know that, because we know how important folate is during pregnancy, right? And so I do a genetic analysis. And then the last test is, why am I drawing? Oh, is an environmental toxins test. And so this is another pillar, I think, to really be aware of preconception is what is your overall toxic load? Because there's a certain threshold that we can handle, you know, as humans. And then there's a tipping point when we can't handle it anymore. So looking into things like glyphosate and mold and heavy metals and other environmental pollutants, and just seeing like how high those levels are, because the higher they are, the more bogged down your liver is going to be. And liver function is so important during pregnancy. And so, yeah, those are kind of my overarching themes that we kind of dive into.
Yeah. And as you were going through all the pillars, I was thinking like, no, like definitely didn't get any of that tested, didn't have anybody talk to me about it, preconception for sure. So, and even like beyond those things, it just made me think of like the testing that they do once you're already pregnant. Even stuff like they told me once I was pregnant, like, oh, well, you actually lost your immunity for rubella, but we can't give you the booster while you're pregnant. So just, don't get rubella.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, yeah, there's some genetic markers that we want to test for. We really should have tested for them before you got pregnant, but we'll see what it is like now. I mean, it's a very reactive medical model, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember when I got my, just kind of standard pregnancy blood work, I remember thinking like, this is it? Like, really? Okay. Yeah. And so I just like did my own, because I could do that, but like not, not everybody has that ability or the know-how or just, to know what to be thinking of outside of that. Because again, we just put so much trust and power in the medical system. And, it's just, we can't, the second we stop advocating for ourselves, that's the second things start falling through the cracks in a really profound way. So.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for women who might be listening and thinking like, oh, I really haven't gotten any of that looked at? And, obviously the medical professionals are not suggesting this. What should I do to advocate for myself?
Well, I think, kind of getting a baseline of where you're at. I think getting, some testing done, some functional lab testing is a great idea, just to get a baseline of where you're at. We can't change things that we don't measure. And so I'm such a fan of the test, don't guess model. And it really gives us an idea of what's happening under the hood. So I think that, searching out a functional practitioner like myself or, somebody that really resonates with you to get some of that testing done is a great way to start. And then other than that, if you're working with just a standard Western medical model, asking for more blood tests. There's standard blood tests, like not functional testing, just standard blood tests that you can ask for. A complete thyroid panel, not just TSH, a complete thyroid panel, complete iron panel. If you can test for any antibodies, particularly thyroid antibodies, that would be great. ANA is another antibody that would be good to test for. And just be asking them, okay, we're going to do blood work. Can you tell me what test you're going to run? And look at the list and be like, okay, I'd really like to add these ones. Mm-hmm. Sorry, my throat.
It's
okay. Try to get it all out here. And then outside of that, everything that's kind of standard throughout pregnancy, you have to research if that's what you really want or not, because maybe it is and maybe it's not, and maybe you just don't know that there's other options, and it just takes diving into that, so things like I mentioned earlier, like the glucola and the Doppler and the ultrasounds, all of those things, you have a choice. And whether you do or don't, either way is great. But I just want people to know that they have a choice and they don't have to be, they're in charge, right? Yeah. It's their health, it's their baby, it's their body. You're in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, because I think we do put a lot of stock in what medical doctors have to say, and there are good reasons for that, but there are also things that, we want to empower women to know that they have the ability to ask questions, to request more testing if they think that it's necessary. Like we have, we link in the show notes, we have a resource for all the different lab testing that you can ask for. And if you look at it, like, it's such a comprehensive list, and most people probably don't have, a third of it done. So especially for women who are experiencing recurrent pregnancy loss, like, we want to encourage them to advocate for themselves for sure.
Yes.
And then, that's professionally or medically what we're hoping for. And on a personal level, what kind of advice would you give for women who are experiencing miscarriage?
My advice is to reach out. It's so lonely. It doesn't have to be. There are people out there ready and willing to support you. Like the the Facebook groups that I mentioned were very helpful. There's lots of other local groups. There's also hotlines. And just know that if your close circle of people in your life are not offering the support that you want, and in the time, it can be hard to ask for that help and support. And so if you can, ask for it. And if that's not something you can do because of the situation or the dynamic of those people, there are outside people that you can lean on and that you can get that support from. And also know that there are, one thing about miscarrying is it's so easy to feel like it's your fault. There's something that you did wrong, or there's something you didn't do or did do that caused this, and that it's your fault. And I just encourage you to just be so kind to yourself and let that go. And we don't need that guilt. We don't need that. It doesn't have a place. And then my last piece would be to really give yourself time to grieve and process and work through that. Sometimes it can be so easy to push negative feelings away and aside. Yeah. And I just, however that looks for you, whether that's therapy or journaling or meditation or whatever it is, but just really working through those emotions. I have found with my clients that tend to kind of push those away, when they do get pregnant again, they all come back. All those feelings and emotions come back, and now they're having to process them while they're pregnant.
Yes.
And so just working through that at the time, I think, is very helpful.
I think that is all excellent advice. Yeah, there's a lot to work through, and we don't usually take the time to do it.
Yeah.
So Brandy, where can the listeners connect with you online?
My website is pivotalorigins.com. That is also my handle on social media. Facebook and Instagram is Pivotal Origins. One new thing that I just launched that's very exciting, I started a Marco Polo channel.
Oh, nice.
And this is a place where you can come and find community. And it's a place where I am sharing the current research that is coming out. And I'm just kind of sharing it in a very easy to understand way around lots of functional nutrition topics, but primarily preconception, pregnancy, postpartum. And my goal with that is so that people are empowered and feel confident in taking the reins in their health and having dialogues with their doctors and their medical professionals, because the average time it takes for research to reach clinical practice is 17 years. And so instead of, sitting back and giving them all the power and kind of passively waiting 17 years for things to catch up, I want people to know what's happening and what's coming out and be able to talk about the current literature with their doctors. And so that is my Marco Polo channel. I am happy to offer your listeners like a free first month so that they can check it out and see how they like it. But that's a great place to find some community and also some empowerment.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. We will link to all of that in the show notes so that the listeners can check it out. And Brandy, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and sharing your personal story with us as well.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our show notes for details on joining our Facebook group and for following along on Instagram. If you would like a free recurrent pregnancy loss lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, that's miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to get your free downloadable checklist. And for even more resources, visit the Miscarriage Hope Desk website, where we have stories of hope plus an entire library of evidence-based research articles related to fertility and miscarriage. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you rate, reviewed, and subscribed to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast. Your ratings and reviews will help others to find us. I want to wrap up by saying that if you are going through a miscarriage, my heart goes out to you, and as difficult as your experience may be, I want you to know that you are not alone and that you will find a path forward.